TDIU, total disability based on individual unemployability, applies when your service-connected disabilities prevent a veteran from working. And the phrase is securing or following a substantially gainful employment. The authority for this is found in 38 CFR 4.16. And so basically what this does is for veterans whose service-connected conditions impact their ability to work, regardless of their combined rating, it allows them to receive compensation at the 100% rate. So if you can't work due to your service-connected disabilities and you're having trouble getting a rating that reflects this, TDIU can be a true lifesaver. It's currently at the 100% rate, and that's what you get if you had TDIU, is currently for 2025 going into 2026. So the end of this year and into the increase for next year is $3,831.30 per month for a single veteran. And this is a real significant jump, even from the 90% rating. We've talked about that before. The other really impactful part, besides the monthly compensation from TDIU, the ability to have that income come in when you can't work, is that it opens the door to a lot of additional benefits, like healthcare without copays, dental and vision coverage, and even dependent benefits if you meet other criteria.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people are concerned if their ratings don't combine to 100% and they have TDIU instead of 100% with their ratings combined. A lot of times they're concerned and they express concerns to us about having TDIU instead of 100% rating. But as you suggested, there are benefits that come with that, with TDIU, right? Because it's paid at the 100% rate. So recently I attended a Senate Veterans Affairs Committee hearing, and we've heard recent discussions about TDIU there in the news. There have been a number of news articles about it. And a lot of the stuff that's coming out is it good? Is it bad? This sort of happens every year or so, where this idea of like, is TDIU good? Do we need to get rid of it? Does it disincentivize people? The reality of it is TDIU is a very important benefit. The people who are receiving it are totally disabled, as the T of TDIU suggests. And, you know, sometimes we talk about the way that VA's ratings combine, this kind of wonky math. It's difficult to understand, but when people are totally disabled and their ratings don't combine just because of how the math works out, this is a really important benefit, as you said, for people to be able to maintain housing, for people to be able to survive.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of value in TDIU beyond the compensation. And so many veterans benefit from it. But however, as you're about to see and as we're about to dive into, a solid TDIU claim, it can be complicated. It's not just, I can't work, let's go. So if you start to get a bit overwhelmed when you're going through this process, just know you don't need to handle this on your own. VA-accredited attorneys can assist you. And if the TDIU claim is filed after your initial claim, they can figure out, what's the best route for you going forward. Should we file a supplemental claim? Should we take this up to the board? What are the issues at play? They can really guide you through what's the correct way, what's the best way to make sure that TDIU claim is ultimately granted as expeditiously as possible.
So we're going to talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about eligibility for TDIU. And determining eligibility for TDIU can be significantly different than other benefits, other VA benefits. TDIU is unique in that rather than rating disabilities by severity, it asks about the veteran's actual ability to obtain and maintain or earn substantially gainful income. So generally, to be eligible for TDIU, you must be unable to secure or maintain substantially gainful employment due to service-connected disabilities. Right. So age doesn't matter. Veterans 30 years old, if they're unable to work or unable to maintain substantially gainful employment, there is a distinction. So I want to make sure that I'm using the lingo correctly. You could be 30 years old, unable to maintain substantially gainful employment due to service-connected conditions. Be eligible for TDIU. So age doesn't matter. The other thing that I want to make sure to emphasize is that, because we see this a lot, veteran is unable to maintain substantially gainful employment, but they have a number of disabilities. And if their inability to maintain gainful employment is based on non-service connected disabilities, they would not be entitled to TDIU. So it's got to be, again, based on those service connected conditions. And it applies to physical and or mental disabilities. Could be combination. So that's not a limitation.
Absolutely. And we said something about the age, a young 30-year-old veteran, but the converse is true too.
Mm-hmm.
You could be 70 and your disabilities, are so severe that putting your age aside, you wouldn't be able to work. So age is just not a factor for consideration, which I think a lot of veterans get confused about, especially our older veterans. Like, well, I'm nearing retirement age. Does this even apply to me? Yes, it does.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two, let's call them paths, two different journeys to TDIU. One is, for lack of a better term, easier than the other, but both are completely valid. So let's start with TDIU, the scheduler path, which is under 38 CFR 4.16a. And that is for veterans who have one disability rated at 60% or higher, or they have a combined rating of 70% or higher, and one of their underlying conditions is rated at least 40%. So for that first group, the 60%, you have one disability at 60. One doesn't always mean one. There's a couple of sub-points in 4.16a that describe things like if it's one body system, like you have all orthopedic conditions, or common etiology. For example, you have diabetes and then you have neuropathy in your extremities, in your hands, in your feet. If those combine to 60, that can count as one. So there's lots of ways to qualify under TDIU-A, even if you have injuries that were incurred in combat, if they're all combat related. And you'll see that in a code sheet. It used to be coded as combat. I don't know how consistent they are with that these days, but in some of our older files, we used to see them really do a great job of saying, okay, this is a combat disability. And then finally, if you're a POW, prisoner of war, any disabilities incurred there can be counted as one. So a couple paths. The other thing, though, is Extraschedular. And Christine, tell us about that.
Yes, if you don't meet those rating requirements that you talked about, the second path to TDIU is Extraschedular, and that's under 38 CFR being the Code of Federal Regulations, 4.16b. Extraschedular TDIU applies when the rating schedule does not adequately reflect the disability picture. So if they don't meet the rating criteria that you talked about, they might still be eligible for TDIU, a little bit more difficult.
Absolutely. So there's a huge change under 4.16b that just happened this past 2025 year. A precedential case from the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims came out, Witkowski versus Clemens, argued by our colleague and friend, April Donahauer. Very proud of this case. That really is changing the way and the hurdles for TDIU under 4.16b. So it used to be that if you weren't under A, you didn't meet those 60% criteria or 70% criteria, the regional office and the board would not grant TDIU on the first go around. What they would do is they would refer your case to the director of compensation service for that person to review the file and issue an opinion about whether you should be entitled to TDIU, despite your combined rating being under 60% or under 70% without a 40% subrating. This was just really nonsense. I mean, it was a rubber stamp. I think I've seen one or two grants coming out of the director of compensation service in the entire, almost 12 years I've been doing this. So it was just a waste of time, frankly. And this case really, because of procedural changes, is particularly because now we have the Appeals Modernization Act, claims in the new system, it just doesn't make sense to continue to do this process. And frankly, the process was not within the confines of what the law says to do. So now boards and regional offices can proceed without delay. They are authorized and have always been authorized. But now we have a court case saying they are authorized to decide TDIU under 4.6b in the first instance. So veterans with strong evidence of an inability to work should expect faster and more consistent adjudication of these claims. I do think that having really great evidence, though, particularly vocational evidence about your inability to work, if you're under 4.16b, is going to continue to be very important.
Absolutely.
And I think we'll continue to see a lot of denials just because of almost it's going to be a sea change to get regional offices and the board to think I can grant this instead of just kind of relying on the director to deny it. So we'll see what happens.
So one thing that I want to talk about a little is marginal employment, right? People often ask us, can I still work? Can I still work a little bit? I want to be able to do whatever I can, but they're not able to make that kind of threshold substantially gainful income. So if you're able to work consistently, then VA will, of course, deny TDIU. The exception is if the veteran's work is marginal. And what that means is that the income is below the federal poverty threshold. 2025 update is that the poverty threshold for 2024 data was $15,940. The 2025 number is pending the U.S. Census publication, so to be continued. But we'll keep an eye on that, and certainly we'll let our listeners know as soon as we know. VA may verify income using IRS and SSA income data to determine whether it meets that poverty threshold, whether it exceeds it, and that's typically what they're going to look at in terms of determining what someone's income or earnings are.
Right. So if you do a small seasonal job, you are. I don't know. I'm not thinking like a greeter, not like a Salvation Army, but say a greeter in Walmart for a day, a week in December. Just you need a little extra cash for the holidays, and you do that. If that gets reported to Social Security, which is what you said with SSA, VA will see that, and they're going to look and see, is this above that poverty threshold or below it? If below, you should be fine. But just know that does get reported to VA, and they do look at it. So be aware. Yep.
And people will often ask too, what if I get paid under the table?
Right.
That is income. That's still income. And they should be reporting it. There are
obligated to.
Right. And there are tax ramifications. We're not going to get into those, but that does count as income.
Yeah.
So
just be aware.
Be aware.
All right. So there's another way veterans can be entitled to TDIU, even if they are working and maybe making more than the federal poverty threshold. But under the regulation, you can still get TDIU for working in a protected work environment. And so what does that mean? It's been squishy for years what that means. Our first kind of look into protected work environment came out in Cantrell versus Shulkin. That was a CAVC, Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, precedential case in 2017. And so VA was at that point refusing to define what this means. They don't want a definition. They want a case-by-case analysis. I'm not sure. But they don't want to stick to something. So the court said until VA creates a better definition, it must consider the magnitude of the veteran's job responsibilities and the degree of accommodation necessary for successful full-time work. So some examples of what that looks like: are you getting special accommodations that no one else gets? Would no one else get them? You're only getting them because you're you. Are you allowed to miss work frequently without consequence? Are you exempt from productivity standards? Income is still a consideration. But the question is, how much is too much? And so that was always kind of up in the air after Cantrell. And then just in 2025, we had another big case come out called the Bruza, where the CAVC talked about a couple other guidance tools for what is a protected work environment as it relates to income. And so the first tool is looking at the maximum annual pension rate established in 38 USC, that's the United States Code, 1521. And so the second tool is attributable income limits for VA healthcare purposes in 38 USC 1722, and we'll link both of those So let's look at the pension rate first. So the maximum pension rate for and healthcare limit for an individual veteran with no dependents was $16,965 starting in December 2024. So this is pretty close to that Census Bureau data. So it doesn't really help us, distinguish between protected and marginal. Okay. But both the annual pension rate and the VA healthcare eligibility threshold are increased if the veteran has a dependent spouse or dependent children. So, for example, a veteran living in Providence, where we are today, has 4 dependents, a spouse, and 3 kids, would be entitled to free VA healthcare if the household income was less than $30,000. So that's a significant jump. The difference is that for marginal employment, it says that you have to consider the poverty threshold for a single veteran. So in this protected work environment scenario, looking at the pension requirements, it's a little bit more favorable to veterans who do have dependents, and it affects the analysis. We've looked at least a few Board of Veterans Appeals decisions where the board showing a willingness to consider how many dependents the veteran has when considering the relevant threshold income as it relates to a protected work environment. So all in all, I don't think we have a ton of clarity on protected work environment. There still are a lot of factors to consider.
Right.
And that's why it's critical to have, I think, guidance at this stage. If this is something you're trying to pursue, whether that be through a VSO, an accredited attorney, or accredited claims agent, I think these are probably some of the most complex TDIU claims that are out there. And so you really should get some help because even VA doesn't quite know what they want it to be.
Okay, so how do you prove unemployability? Let's talk about that. If you meet any rating or financial requirements that apply, the next consideration is your functional ability. VA considers the practical ability to maintain consistent employment. A really important case, Ray v. Wilkie, establishes a functional test, which is really important. Proud of that case. Also a CCK case.
Yes. There's a theme here.
There's a theme. We have been involved in these cases for a very long time.
Yes.
And have really, and it's to your point, this is why it's important when someone is going through the process and they have a complex case, it's important to seek, assistance from an accredited, whether there's a VSO, an accredited claims agent, or attorney. It can be, it can be the difference between a denial and
a precedential case.
Case.
That's
okay.
right.
So in Ray, it established a functional test, physical limitations, lifting, standing, walking, sitting, mental limitations, memory, concentration, ability to handle stress, reliability. And also talks about workplace factors. So need for supervision, attendance, ability to meet deadlines, really ability to kind of deliver on work. And so those are really the aspects that that VA is looking at when they're considering whether someone is unable to maintain substantially gainful employment.
So what are the types of strong evidence that veterans can use to get there? What can we look to? And so a quick note, you don't need to prove that you have zero workability. That's not the test. You'll see that in rating decisions and board decisions. That's wrong. That's something that should be appealed. All you have to show is an inability to maintain that substantially gainful work or follow it. So maybe you get it, but it can't last.
Yep.
So some categories of evidence that can help show that are potentially compensation and pension exam findings. There are favorable ones out there. I know a lot of our viewers are skeptical of that, but they do exist. Other medical evidence from your treating doctors. Your lay statements are absolutely competent to describe the limitations. Who knows better than you how your service-connected disabilities impact your ability to work? Lay statements from family or coworkers are also very helpful, especially if you have former coworkers that are willing to chime in. That can be critical. VA will often ask for a form, I love their forms. 214192, which is a statement from your employer or former employer asking about kind of the terms of your employment. What was your job? When did you last work there? What was the reason that you just stopped working? But that can be helpful if you still have a connection with someone at that job. And then finally, very important, something that we utilize all the time is an expert opinion from a vocational expert, someone who's trained in what is required to work. They understand job requirements. They understand all the limitations of work and can put that into writing and use their expertise to give an opinion to VA about whether it's at least as likely as not that you're unable to secure and follow substantially gainful employment.
And part of why those vocational expert reports can be so useful in proving a case is because they can expand on those specific limitations, those factors that I talked about earlier and that we see in Ray v. Wilkie. The C&P exams that you mentioned, a lot of times they use kind of check the box forms, right? Where that don't allow for explanation or don't include. There are comment sections that could allow for them. So with a vocational report, those experts can provide real world job market analysis, assessment of productivity, reliability, and workplace tolerances. And they can also provide a strong counterweight to any unfavorable C&P exam conclusions. So vocational experts will, just to talk a little bit more about what they can do, they can talk about and assess. They're skilled in assessing transferable skills, work pace, absences, feasibility of part-time or sheltered employment, which are all kind of critical aspects to a person's ability to maintain substantially gainful employment.
So how do we get TDIU? How do I get from where I am to the end goal of TDIU? So you shouldn't need to file a claim for TDIU. If it's apparent from your record that you can't work. There's a case, not a CCK case, called Rice versus Shinseki, that TDIU is part of any pending increased rating claim. However, despite this rule and requirement, VA will miss it. And so we recommend that you file protectively another VA form, the 218940, which is the application for TDIU form. And realistically speaking, even if it's raised in the record, VA will send you this form. Or they used to.
Still do.
Do? All right. Just checking. Sometimes things stop and I don't know about it until I'm trying to appeal something. So you should absolutely file that form if you're thinking of going for TDIU. It's just VA expects it and it'll just kind of smooth the waters. So go with the flow there. The form requires you to list what service-connected disabilities are preventing you from working. Note here, don't include non-service-connected conditions on this form. If you do, VA will likely deny you. So truly take a moment and think, is it my service-connected conditions or is it this non-service-connected thing that's preventing me from working? If it's the non-service-connected thing, you likely don't qualify for TDIU. You're going to list the last date that you worked, your hospitalization and medical care history, your full employment history for the last 5 years worked, not the last 5 calendar years, your last 5 years of employment. This is critical too, because sometimes we have veterans who've been out of work for decades and they just put nothing instead of looking back to their last 5 years of work, if any, though, and any education or vocational training. There's 3 methods to apply, as always. You can do it online through your va.gov account. You could go in person, or you can use your accredited rep, VSO, attorney, claims agent to help you out. Again, if it's complicated and requires a lot of massaging to make this work, we recommend that you speak with an accredited rep to make sure the evidence is lined up perfectly so that package goes in and it's everything VA needs to make the decision is there.
So how far back will the effective date go? Let's talk about effective dates and back pay. So an effective date is the date essentially when VA says that they have to pay you back to that date. It's the date when the benefits become effective. Common VA error is assigning the effective date based on the date of that form submission, that 218940 form submission, as opposed to the date when employability arises in the record, if claims are pending. The date of the form might not necessarily be the incorrect date, but usually when we see that that's the effective date, we look, not usually, we always look further to ensure that the effective date is properly assigned. It's a legal requirement that VA must award the earliest effective date that entitlement arose. That's under 38 USC section 5110 and 38 CFR 3.400. And VA must infer TDIU from the record when the evidence suggests unemployability.
That's right. So evidence that can suggest unemployability and trigger an earlier effective date, maybe a CMP exam noting an inability to work. A doctor's statement could work. Employer documenting functional limitations. If any of those are submitted, during a pending claim, VA should really look to the effective date of that claim and not the date of the 8940. Even the 8940, though, let's say you've got nothing pending and you just want to file for TDIU, you file your 8940. You mentioned 3.400 at the top of this, 38 CFR 3.400. 38 CFR 3.400.02 requires VA to have a look-back period of 1 year for any increased rating claim. And so TDIU is at its heart an increased rating claim. And so if you became unemployable or there's evidence of unemployability in that 1 year look-back period, you might be entitled to a full extra year of that 100% rating from the date of your TDIU claim. And that can be a lot of compensation and really life-changing for veterans. So very important to challenge ineffective dates because these errors can cost you years of lost back pay. And as we talked about, we're at about $3,800 a month for that 100% rating. So that really adds up.
Absolutely.
All right, let's look at some frequently asked questions because we get a lot, and rightfully so, questions about TDIU.
First question, does self-employment, gig, and retirement income count? Income from self-employment or gig work can disqualify a veteran if the annual net income is above that federal poverty threshold. Retirement does not disqualify a veteran, however. This is a common question. We talked about age doesn't matter. They can't consider age. Some people will come to us and say, oh, well, I retired, so I'm not eligible for it. But the bottom line is if a person is unable to maintain substantially gainful employment because of service-connected conditions, doesn't matter if they retired. It doesn't matter what their age is. And so that's really, really important. But just a reminder, that VA cannot consider non-service connected disabilities.
Right.
Only the functional impact of service connected disabilities matters.
Right. Okay. Next question. Is TDIU permanent? TDIU is not necessarily permanent. We've talked about permanent and total ratings a lot, but TDIU isn't necessarily forever. You could lose it if you fail to continue to meet the standards for unemployability. One, if you start making more income, let's say you're doing, a marginal job and you get a promotion and you're doing more work, taking more responsibility on, and that suddenly becomes not marginal, that could change. If your underlying conditions improve to the point where they're no longer preventing you from securing and following substantially gainful employment, that could also cause VA to recalculate your TDIU entitlement. That said, your underlying conditions could be permanent. You could look for clues like no future exams scheduled, permanent in nature. If you see, Chapter 35 eligibility, those are all clues that you have a permanent and total rating. And so you'll be protected from future digging around in your file. However, if you were to file anything new, VA can always take a fresh look. And we'll discuss this more in a later segment.
Okay. Next question. What are the most common reasons VA reduces or terminates TDIU? Great question. Failing to return VA Form 214140, going back to work, substantially gainful income, right? Reported income from Social Security Administration. VA does get IRS and SSA matching data. So they will sometimes, when they get that, if it shows that someone's income has, as you suggested before, has increased, or that they now have income that exceeds that federal poverty line, then someone may lose eligibility for TDIU. Improvement of disability, right? That's some disabilities wax and wane. Some of them do improve. And if it improves and someone's now able to go back to work, then that's going to disqualify them. And then one other thing is fraud.
Rare, but happens.
Very rare.
Very rare.
But if VA were to determine there's fraud,
Correct.
then they'll take away the TDIU.
So the takeaway here is that veterans should seek assistance from a VA-accredited agent or attorney, a lawyer with experience, if they're confused about eligibility, if they need help with evidence, and they believe that VA hasn't assigned them the correct effective date.